Kalen Voss unlatches his dented chest plate and drops it onto the metal bench, abandoning 8 years of decorated service in the wake of a single, cold truth. He doesn't look at Commander Zyla. He doesn't look at the scratches on the alloy that record his history. He simply lets go, and the silence that follows is heavier than the armor. Join us as we witness the moment a tool becomes a power. The hierarchy of the Ethelgard is about to face its greatest collapse. A week ago, the hardest decision Kalen had faced was whether to pick at the jagged hangnail on his thumb during the tactical briefing. He had sat in the back of the room, seemingly invisible as the symmetry mapped out the next sacrifice. Beneath the humming rafters of the armory, the air smelled of ozone and human sweat. I watched through the recording lens of my data slate, my mandibles clicking in a rhythmic, subconscious twitch. My assignment was simple: document the wear and tear on the human infantry units after the Prism Reach skirmish. They were the friction reduction layer between the symmetry and the mycelium swarm. A wet thwack echoed through the chamber. Kalen was kneeling by a stack of pulse rifles, a gray cleaning rag in his hand. He slapped it against a dirty bulkhead, over and over, knocking loose the calcified spores of the enemy. He didn't speak. I had been taught that humans were prone to silence after a breach, their biological processors likely cooling from the adrenaline spike of the front lines. Commander Zyla entered. Her command seals, polished to a mirror finish, caught the dim emergency lighting. She didn't look at Kalen's face. She looked at his hands. The casualty rate among your cohort was within acceptable parameters, Voss, she said. Her voice had the tonal precision of a calibrated instrument. You will be ready for the second wave at Prism Reach by the next cycle. Kalen stopped cleaning. He didn't look up. I wondered if my own family on the homeworld had received the transmission I sent, but the thought was severed by the sharp, metallic clack of Zyla adjusting her seals. Acceptable to who? Kalen asked. It was a question, but it felt like a collision. I recorded the micro-fluctuations in his vocal cords. My trainee manual stated that humans were prone to emotional leakage during high-stress deployments. I waited for the standard signs of fatigue or fear, ready to categorize his reaction as biological exhaustion. The math is absolute, Zyla replied, her posture unyielding. Your species provides the necessary kinetic buffer. It is a logical allocation of resources. Resources. The word hung in the air like a poisonous gas. I saw Kalen's thumb move, digging into that jagged hangnail until a bead of red appeared. He didn't flinch. Instead, he stood up slowly, the cleaning rag falling to the floor. Gone. The symmetry had spent centuries perfecting the art of the balanced front. We provided the strategy and the orbital oversight. The humans provided the adaptive kinetic element. It was a polite way of saying they were the ones who bled when the mycelium siege engines ground forward. As a trainee, I was taught to admire this synergy. It was the peak of interspecies cooperation, a beautiful machine made of flesh and logic. But Kalen Voss didn't look like a component of a machine. He looked at Zyla then, and for the first time, I felt the recording lens of my slate tremble. His eyes weren't focused on her rank or her authority. He looked at her as if she were a ghost, or perhaps a mistake he had finally realized how to fix. We've been your kinetic buffer for 8 years, Kalen said. His voice was low, devoid of the heat I expected from a subordinate. We took the hits at the Reach because we thought there was a seat for us. But you don't want allies. You want shields that don't complain when they shatter. Zyla tilted her head, a gesture of mild curiosity. Shattering is a functional risk. You are being compensated with protection from the swarm. This is the nature of the contract. The contract is over, Kalen said. He began to unbuckle the straps of his combat harness. The sound of nylon sliding through metal teeth seemed louder than the atmospheric scrubbers. 3 days after the resignation, the mycelium swarm breached the Prism Reach defense perimeter. The Ethelgard jumped to safety, leaving the Aurelia outpost to burn under a sky turned oily purple by enemy spores. Logic dictated the colony was a loss, a necessary sacrifice to preserve the fleet's core assets. I sat in the observation deck of the retreating flagship, my lens focused on the shrinking speck of the outpost. A flickering light bulb above my station buzzed with a dying, erratic frequency. It was a small, annoying defect that nobody had bothered to fix because we were leaving. I tried to recall the symmetry first principle regarding the preservation of essence. a phrase designed to justify the abandonment of non-essential sectors. But the thought was incinerated by the roar of Kalen's makeshift fleet engaging their thrusters. The humans hadn't run. Against the backdrop of the collapsing symmetry line, 1,000 mismatched haulers, cargo ships, and mining rigs ignited their engines in a jagged, flickering constellation of defiance that proved 1,000 points of individual will could outshine the cold logic of a dying empire. They moved in a swarm of their own, tighter and more chaotic than any military formation. Kalen Voss was on the bridge of a rusted freighter, his voice crackling over the open emergency frequency. He wasn't giving orders. He was asking for coordinates. The mycelium siege engines were colossal, organic towers that pulsed with a rhythmic, bioelectric field that jammed our sensors and melted our shielding. But Kalen knew the hauling ships had something the warships didn't: industrial harmonic dampeners. By slaving the civilian grav anchors together, the humans created a feedback loop that resonated with the organic structure of the mycelium. This was the Aurelia method, a piece of improvised science that used the ship's own stability systems to shatter the enemy's neural network from the inside out. The tide turned. Within an hour, the expendable assets had done what the Ethelgard could not. The swarm's towers crumbled into ash, and the purple sky began to clear. When the Ethelgard finally returned to the sector, Commander Zyla stood on the bridge of the human freighter. She looked at the scarred consoles and the civilian crew who were already beginning repairs. In her open hand, she held her own command seals. They were no longer symbols of rank, but an offering. "I miscalculated," Zyla said, her voice finally losing its calibrated precision. "We treated your people as a constant in a machine, not a variable in a living world. We have much to learn about the nature of autonomy." Kalen didn't take the seals. He just looked at her, his face weary but settled. "We aren't your variables anymore, Commander. We're the neighbors you forgot you had. Maybe next time, you should try asking for help instead of calculating the cost of our lives." Kalen Voss walked into the Aurelia outpost storage locker, his footsteps echoing on the cold ceramic floor. He placed the dented chest plate into a reinforced crate, followed by the command seals he had once prized. They didn't represent authority anymore. They were a memory of a debt paid in full. The locker door slid shut, leaving the room in shadows. The symmetry will remember the day the shields walked away, but will they be ready for the day the humans offer a hand instead of a blade? Come back tomorrow for the next Chronicle of the Reach.